The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m., nestled between a promotional offer from my bank and a reminder about my car insurance renewal. The subject line was deceptively simple. Board meeting minutes. Urgent review required. I was sitting in my corner office on the 23rd floor of the Meridian Tower, overlooking the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. Rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the November sky hung low and gray, matching the mood that was about to descend on my perfectly ordered world. My name is Alexander Pierce, and until that moment, I believed I was living the American dream. At 38, I was the co-founder and chief technology officer of Nexus Innovations, a software development company I had built from nothing with my two best friends from MIT. We had started in my garage 12 years earlier, survived on ramen noodles and coffee, and somehow managed to grow our little startup into a $500 million company, with offices in 6 cities. But that email was about to teach me that success built on trust could crumble in an instant. I opened the attachment with the casual confidence of someone who had never been betrayed by the people he loved most. The document was formatted professionally, bearing our company letterhead and the familiar signatures of the board members. Everything looked normal until I reached the 3rd paragraph. Motion carried 4-1 to remove Alexander Pierce from his position as Chief Technology Officer. Effective immediately. Mr. Pierce's removal is necessitated by recent concerns about his decision-making capabilities and potential conflicts of interest regarding the proposed merger with TechFlow Solutions. I read the sentence 3 times before the words penetrated my consciousness. Then I scrolled to the bottom of the document to see the voting record. In favor of removal, Marcus Chen, co-founder, CEO; Sarah Williams, co-founder, COO; Robert Morrison, external board member; Jennifer Hayes, external board member. Against removal, Alexander Pierce, co-founder, CTO. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had held a board meeting to fire me without bothering to invite me. My own best friends, the people I had shared a cramped apartment with during our struggling years, who had been the best men at my wedding, who had celebrated every milestone of our company's growth with champagne and tears of joy, had stabbed me in the back with corporate precision. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus first. We had known each other since freshman year at MIT, where we had bonded over late-night coding sessions and a shared dream of changing the world through technology. He was the visionary, always talking about market penetration and scaling strategies. I was the builder, the one who turned his ideas into functioning code. The call went straight to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and familiar, invited me to leave a message. I hung up without saying a word. Sarah's number was next on my speed dial. Sweet, brilliant Sarah, who had joined our partnership during our 2nd year, when we realized we needed someone who understood business operations. She had left a lucrative consulting job to take a risk on our little company, and I had been the one who convinced Marcus to bring her aboard as an equal partner. Her phone also went to voicemail. I sat in my chair, staring out at the rain, trying to process what was happening. The TechFlow merger they mentioned in the document was news to me. We had never discussed merging with anyone, let alone TechFlow, which was one of our biggest competitors. If such a deal was in the works, I should have been the first to know. The technical due diligence alone would require my input on every aspect of our codebase and development processes. My office door opened without a knock. Marcus walked in, followed by Sarah and 2 men I recognized but had never met personally. Our external board members, brought in last year when we took on additional funding to fuel our expansion. "Alex," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. Cold, professional, distant. "I see you got the email." "What the hell is going on, Marcus?" I stood up, my hands trembling slightly. "What is this board meeting I wasn't invited to? What merger are you talking about?" Sarah stepped forward, and I noticed she was carrying a cardboard box in a manila folder. Her eyes, which had always sparkled with warmth and intelligence, were now carefully neutral. "Alex, we need to discuss your transition out of the company. There are some legal documents you need to sign, and we'll need you to pack up your personal items." "Transition out." I laughed, but the sound came out hollow and bitter. This is my company. I wrote the first line of code. I designed the architecture that everything is built on. You can't just transition me out." Robert Morrison, the senior external board member, cleared his throat. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that announced his importance before he even spoke. "Mr. Pierce, I understand this is difficult, but the board has made its decision. The merger with TechFlow requires streamlined leadership, and frankly, your recent behavior has raised concerns about your judgment." "My recent behavior?" I felt like I was in some kind of fever dream. "What behavior? What are you talking about?" Marcus finally met my eyes, and what I saw there chilled me to the bone. There was no warmth, no recognition of our years of friendship and partnership. He looked at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was an obstacle to be removed. "The drinking, Alex. The missed meetings. The erratic decision-making. We've all been covering for you, but it's gotten too serious to ignore." I stared at him in shock. "Drinking? Marcus, what are you talking about? I don't drink during work hours. I haven't missed a meeting in 6 months. What erratic decisions?" Sarah opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. She spread them across my desk with the efficiency of a prosecutor presenting evidence. The images showed me at various bars and restaurants around the city, sometimes holding a drink, sometimes appearing to be an animated conversation shaken over the latest threateningness. She said quietly, "Alex, you've been meeting with representatives from our competitors. You've been drinking heavily during business hours. We have documented instances of you making unauthorized promises to clients and contradicting board decisions in public forums." I picked up one of the photographs, studying it closely. It showed me at Murphy's Pub, a place I frequented for lunch meetings because it was quiet and had good Wi-Fi. In the photo, I was holding what appeared to be a beer and talking to a man in a business suit. "This was taken last Tuesday," I said slowly, the memory coming back to me. "I was meeting with Jim Patterson from Patterson Consulting about the new client onboarding system. That's not a beer, it's a Coke. And Jim isn't a competitor, he's a potential vendor." "That's not what our investigator determined," Robert Morrison said smoothly. "The man you were meeting with is David Chen, no relation to Marcus, who works for TechFlow's business development team." I felt the world tilting beneath my feet. "That's not possible. Jim Patterson showed me his business card. We exchanged emails for weeks before that meeting." Jennifer Hayes, the other external board member, spoke for the first time. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp features and the kind of predatory smile that lawyers and consultants perfected. "Mr. Pierce, we have copies of those emails. The address Jim Patterson was using belongs to a domain registered to a subsidiary of TechFlow Solutions." The room was spinning. I sat down heavily in my chair, trying to make sense of what they were telling me. Someone had been impersonating a consulting company to meet with me. Someone had been taking photographs of our meetings and presenting them as evidence of corporate espionage. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate deception to make me look like a traitor to my own company. "I need to see those emails," I said. "I need to see all the evidence you're talking about. This is insane. Someone is setting me up." Marcus shook his head sadly. "Alex, this is exactly what we're talking about. The paranoia, the inability to accept responsibility for your actions. We've been friends for 15 years, but I can't let our personal relationship compromise the company." "You're right," I said quietly, looking around the room at the faces of people who had once been my closest allies. "We have been friends for 15 years. Which is why I know you, Marcus. I know when you're lying." His face flushed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not lying, Alex. I'm trying to save our company from the damage you've been causing." "Show me the merger documents," I said. "If this is really about streamlining leadership for a TechFlow merger, show me the terms. Show me the due diligence reports. Show me anything that proves this isn't just an elaborate scheme to steal my company." Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look, just a quick glance, but I caught it. In that moment I saw the truth. This wasn't about my behavior or any merger. This was about something else entirely. something they didn't want me to know about. "The merger documents are confidential until the deal is finalized," Jennifer Hayes said. "But I can tell you that TechFlow has made it clear that your presence on the leadership team would be a deal breaker." "Convenient," I said. "Very convenient." Robert Morrison stepped forward with the efficiency of someone who had orchestrated many such corporate executions. "Mr. Pierce, you have two options. You can sign these severance documents and transition out quietly, or we can terminate you for cause and you'll leave with nothing. The choice is yours." I looked at the documents he placed on my desk. The severance package was generous: $2 million in cash, plus my vested stock options, plus a consulting contract that would pay me $50,000 a month for 2 years. On paper, it looked like a golden parachute, but I knew better. The consulting contract would include a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working in the software industry for at least 5 years. The stock options would be worthless if the merger went through and diluted existing shareholders. The $2 million was a fraction of what my 1/3 ownership stake was actually worth. "I need time to review these documents with my attorney," I said. "You have until end of business today," Morrison replied. "If you don't sign by 5 p.m., we'll proceed with termination for cause." After they left, I sat alone in my office. The office I had designed myself, with its custom bookshelves filled with technical manuals and industry awards, its whiteboard covered with architectural diagrams that represented years of innovative thinking, its view of the city I had hoped to transform through technology. I opened my laptop and began digging into the evidence they had presented. The emails from Jim Patterson were indeed coming from a domain that, when traced through multiple shell companies, eventually led back to TechFlow Solutions. But the registration dates told a different story. The domain had been registered only 4 months ago, well after I had begun corresponding with Jim Patterson. Someone had taken a real consulting company, registered a similar domain name, and created a fake email system to impersonate them. Someone had then arranged meetings with me using this fake identity, photographed those meetings, and presented them as evidence of corporate espionage. The level of planning and resources required for such a deception was staggering. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to push me out of the company. This was a months-long campaign to systematically destroy my reputation and create justification for my removal. But why? I spent the next several hours going through financial records, board meeting minutes, and internal communications, looking for clues. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, right around the time the fake Jim Patterson emails had started, Marcus and Sarah had been approached by TechFlow with an acquisition offer. But it wasn't a merger. It was a complete buyout. TechFlow wanted to purchase Nexus Innovations for $800 million with the condition that they would only retain the intellectual property and key technical assets. In other words, TechFlow wanted our code, our patents, and our client contracts. They didn't want our leadership team, our office leases, or our employee obligations. It was a deal that would make Marcus and Sarah very wealthy while eliminating all the messy complications of actually running a company. The only problem was me. As a 1/3 owner, I had veto power over any major corporate decisions. I would never agree to a deal that eliminated hundreds of jobs and essentially destroyed everything we had built together. So they had decided to eliminate me first. The fake evidence, the board meeting without me, the impossible deadline for reviewing severance documents. It was all designed to pressure me into signing away my rights quickly before I could discover what was really happening. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, David Goldstein, who had handled our corporate legal work since we incorporated the company. His secretary told me he was in a meeting, but would call me back within the hour. While I waited, I began copying files from the company servers, technical documentation, source code repositories, financial records, client contracts, anything that might be relevant to what was happening. If they wanted to play hardball, I needed to understand exactly what assets we were talking about. David called back at 4:15 p.m., 45 minutes before my deadline to sign the severance agreement. "Alex, I've been trying to reach you all day," he said. His voice sounded strained, worried. I got a call this morning from Marcus and Sarah asking me to prepare some documents related to your departure from the company. So you already know what's happening. I know what they told me, but I have to say, Alex, none of it sounds like the person I've worked with for the past 8 years. They're claiming you've been engaging in corporate espionage and that you're suffering from substance abuse problems. It's all fabricated, David. Every single piece of evidence they showed me today was manufactured. Someone has been running an elaborate con game to make me look like a traitor to my own company. There was a long pause. Alex, that's a very serious accusation. Do you have proof? I'm working on it. But David, I need you to know something else. This isn't about my behavior or any merger with TechFlow. They're planning to sell the entire company. They want me out so they can approve the sale without my consent. Another pause, longer this time. Alex, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. This morning Marcus and Sarah also asked me to resign as the company's legal counsel. They said there might be conflicts of interest if I continued to represent both the company and you personally. My heart sank. And I agreed. I'm sorry, Alex, but I can't represent you in any dispute with Nexus Innovations. You'll need to find independent counsel. David, you've been our lawyer for 8 years. You know the history of this company better than anyone. You know what we built together. I do, and that's exactly why I can't be involved in this. Alex, my advice to you as a friend, not as a lawyer, is to sign the severance agreement. Take the money and start fresh somewhere else. Fighting this will cost you more than you can imagine. The call ended, leaving me alone with 40 minutes to make a decision that would determine the rest of my life. I looked at the severance agreement again, reading through the terms more carefully. The non-compete clause was even worse than I had initially thought. It would prevent me not just from working for competitors, but from starting my own company, consulting with any technology firms, or even teaching programming classes. For 5 years I would be effectively banned from the industry I had devoted my life to. The stock buyback clause was equally devastating. They were offering to purchase my shares at fair market value as determined by an independent appraisal, but the appraisal firm they had chosen was one that consistently undervalued technology companies. Instead of receiving 1/3 of $800 million, I would probably get less than $50 million for my stake. It was highway robbery, dressed up in legal language, and presented as a generous severance package. At 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the deadline, I made my decision. I walked out of my office, leaving the unsigned severance agreement on my desk, and headed for the elevator. As I waited for the doors to open, Marcus appeared in the hallway. Alex, where are you going? You need to sign those documents. I turned to face my former best friend, the man who had been like a brother to me for 15 years. I'm going home, Marcus. And tomorrow, I'm going to start figuring out how to destroy you. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. As they closed, I saw the expression on Marcus's face change from confident authority to something that looked almost like fear. He should have been afraid. Because while they had been busy fabricating evidence and orchestrating boardroom coups, I had been quietly building something they had forgotten about, a complete understanding of every technical system that made our company valuable. They wanted to steal my company? Fine. But they were about to learn that stealing something and actually making it work were two very different things. I drove home through the rain in a daze, my mind reeling from the day's revelations. The familiar streets of Lincoln Park seemed foreign now, as if I were seeing them through someone else's eyes. Everything that had defined my identity, successful entrepreneur, trusted partner, technical innovator, had been stripped away in a single afternoon. My house sat on a quiet, tree-lined street, a restored Victorian that I'd purchased 3 years earlier when the company's success finally made homeownership feasible. Emily, my wife of 6 years, would be home from her job at the museum by now, probably starting dinner and wondering why I hadn't called to let her know I'd be late. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that everything you've built together is gone? I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes, watching the rain streak down my windshield and trying to find the words. Emily was brilliant in her own right, a curator of contemporary art with a PhD from Northwestern, and an understanding of human nature that often left me amazed. She would see through any attempt to minimize what had happened. The front door opened before I reached it. Emily stood silhouetted in the warm light from our hallway, her auburn hair pulled back in the messy bun she favored when she was working on exhibition catalogs, her green eyes immediately reading the devastation written across my face. "What happened?" she asked simply. I told her everything. We sat at our kitchen table, the dinner she had prepared growing cold between us, while I explained the board meeting, the fabricated evidence, the merger plot, the ultimatum. Emily listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. David Goldstein dropped me as a client. They've given me until tomorrow morning to sign a severance agreement that would basically eliminate me from the technology industry for 5 years. If I don't sign, they'll fire me for cause and I'll get nothing." Emily's grip on my hand tightened. "Alex, look at me." I met her eyes, expecting to see sympathy or worry. Instead, I saw steel. "These people, your supposed best friends, just tried to steal 12 years of your life's work. They fabricated evidence to make you look like a criminal. They conspired to cheat you out of hundreds of millions of dollars. And you're sitting here talking about signing their agreement. What choice do I have? Fighting them will cost a fortune in legal fees, and there's no guarantee I'll win. They control the board, they control the company's resources, they control the narrative. You have other choices," Emily said quietly. "You're the person who built that company's entire technical infrastructure. You know things they don't think you know. You have access they don't realize you still have. And most importantly, you have time. Time they don't think you'll use effectively." I stared at her, surprised by the calculation in her voice. In 6 years of marriage, I had never seen this side of Emily. Strategic, almost predatory in her thinking. "What are you suggesting?" She stood up and began pacing around our kitchen, her mind visibly working through possibilities. "I'm suggesting that you stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a chess player. Marcus and Sarah made a mistake when they decided to betray you. They assumed you would react emotionally, sign their papers, and disappear quietly. They're counting on you being too hurt and shocked to fight back effectively. But I don't know how to fight back. I'm a programmer, not a corporate warrior." Emily stopped pacing and fixed me with an intense stare. "Alex, do you remember what you told me about programming when we first started dating? You said the key to solving any complex problem was breaking it down into smaller, manageable pieces, then solving each piece systematically." I nodded, remembering that conversation from our early days together. "This is just another complex problem," she continued. "Marcus and Sarah have vulnerabilities, they all do. You know their secrets, their weaknesses, their dependencies. You understand the technical systems they're trying to steal better than anyone else in the world. And most importantly, you have something they don't. What's that? You have nothing left to lose." That night, Emily and I began planning what she called Operation Reset, a systematic campaign to expose the truth about what had happened and recover what had been stolen from me. The first step was information gathering. While I still had access to the company systems, I began downloading everything that might be relevant, not just the technical documentation I had started copying earlier, but financial records, email archives, board meeting recordings, personnel files, client contracts, and vendor agreements. Emily meanwhile used her network of contacts in the art world to find an attorney who specialized in complex corporate disputes. The art community in Chicago was surprisingly well connected to the business world, and Emily's reputation as a curator had given her relationships with some very powerful people. "I found someone," she told me around midnight as I was still downloading files from the company servers. "Margaret Chen, no relation to Marcus, is a partner at Morris & Wells Associates. She's handled some of the biggest corporate fraud cases in the Midwest, and she's willing to meet with us tomorrow morning." "Can we afford her?" Emily smiled grimly. "She's willing to work on contingency. She gets paid only if we win, but she gets a substantial percentage of whatever we recover. I told her what you suspected about the tech flow deal, and she seemed very interested. By 3 a.m., I had copied over 2 terabytes of data from the company's systems, essentially creating a complete mirror of Nexus Innovations' digital infrastructure on an encrypted external drive. If they wanted to change the locks, they were welcome to try, but I now had my own key to everything that mattered. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. Instead, Emily and I met with Margaret Chen at her downtown law office. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that radiated from her eyes. She listened to our story with the focused attention of a predator sizing up her prey. "This is interesting," she said when we finished. "Very interesting. Corporate coups are more common than most people realize, but they're usually more subtle. Your partners were either very confident or very sloppy." She opened a legal pad and began taking notes. "The fabricated evidence is particularly intriguing. Creating false identities to justify firing a co-founder suggests desperation. They needed you gone quickly, which means they're operating under some kind of time pressure. The tech flow deal," I said. "If they're really planning to sell the company, they probably have deadlines to meet." "Exactly. Which gives us leverage. Tell me about your technical access to the company's systems." I explained how I had designed most of the company's infrastructure personally, including security protocols that I had never fully documented for anyone else. Even if they changed passwords and revoked my official access, there were backup systems and administrative tools that only I knew about. Margaret's smile was predatory. "Mr. Pierce, I think your partners may have made a critical error. They've assumed that removing you from the company would immediately eliminate your ability to cause problems for them. But in technology companies, the person who built the systems often retains access through channels that aren't obvious to management." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we gather evidence of their conspiracy before we reveal our hand. If they're really planning to sell the company without your consent, there will be communications, documents, financial transfers, proof that we can use to expose them." Emily leaned forward. "How long would that take?" "Depends on how careful they've been. But given how sloppy they were with the fake evidence against Alex, I suspect they haven't been as discreet about the merger as they should have been." Margaret explained her strategy. "Rather than immediately challenging my termination or trying to rejoin the company, we would spend the next several weeks quietly gathering evidence of the conspiracy. I would use my technical access to monitor their communications and document their preparations for the tech flow deal. Meanwhile, Margaret would begin building a legal case based on breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. The goal," she said, "is not just to get you reinstated. The goal is to expose them so thoroughly that they have no choice but to make you whole, financially and professionally." I left Margaret's office feeling something I hadn't experienced since receiving that first email: hope. That afternoon, while Marcus and Sarah were probably wondering why I hadn't shown up to sign their severance agreement, I was in my home office setting up a sophisticated monitoring system that would give me real-time access to every digital communication flowing through Nexus Innovations. The beauty of being the person who designed a company's security architecture is that you understand not just how it's supposed to work, but how it actually works. There are always backdoors, always administrative overrides, always logging systems that capture more information than users realize. Within hours, I was reading Marcus and Sarah's emails in real time. What I discovered was even worse than I had suspected. The first email I intercepted was from Sarah to someone named J. Harrison at TechFlow Solutions, sent at 2:47 p.m. on the same day they had attempted to force me out. Subject: Pierce Situation Update. J. Harrison: "The Alex situation is more complicated than anticipated. He refused to sign the severance agreement and walked out yesterday. Marcus is concerned he might try to cause problems with the board or go public with accusations. Our legal counsel advises that we proceed with termination for cause, but we need to be prepared for potential litigation. Alex is not the type to go quietly, and he has access to company systems that could be problematic. Can we accelerate the timeline for closing? The sooner we finalize the transaction, the less leverage he has to cause problems. Best regards, Sarah. The response came back within an hour. Subject: RE. Pierce situation update. Sarah: understood. Our technical team has been concerned about Pierce's involvement from the beginning. His deep knowledge of your systems represents a significant security risk if he becomes adversarial. We can accelerate the timeline, but we'll need complete documentation of all technical assets within 2 weeks. Can you guarantee Pierce won't have access to sabotage anything before closing? Also, our board is asking questions about the circumstances of Pierce's departure. They want assurance that this won't create legal complications that could affect the deal. J. Harrison, Senior VP, Business Development, TechFlow Solutions. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. TechFlow wasn't just buying the company. They were specifically concerned about eliminating me as a potential threat. They understood that I could cause significant problems for their acquisition if I chose to fight back. But they had underestimated exactly how much damage I could cause. Over the next several days, I monitored every communication flowing through the company's systems. What emerged was a detailed picture of a conspiracy that had been months in the planning. The fake Jim Patterson identity had been created by a consulting firm, hired by TechFlow to build a case for my removal. They had researched my meeting patterns, identified restaurants and bars I frequented for business lunches, and systematically arranged encounters that could be photographed and misinterpreted. The external board members, Robert Morrison and Jennifer Hayes, had been recommended by TechFlow and were essentially acting as their representatives on our board. They had been providing inside information about the company's financials and strategic plans for months. Even David Goldstein, our longtime attorney, had been compromised. TechFlow had retained his law firm for an unrelated matter and made it clear that representing me in any dispute with Nexus Innovations would constitute a conflict of interest. But the most devastating discovery was a series of emails between Marcus and Sarah, discussing how to divide the proceeds from the TechFlow sale. Subject: distribution discussion. Marcus: I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday regarding the sale proceeds distribution. With Alex out of the picture, we need to decide how to handle his equity stake. The termination for cause approach would allow us to invoke the bad actor clause in the shareholder agreement, which would reduce his payout to essentially nothing. But I'm worried about the legal exposure if he fights it. Alternative approach: we proceed with the sale as planned, but structure it so that the 800 meter purchase price is divided into tranches. The first tranche, 300 malers, goes to active management, you and me. The second tranche, 400 meter, is allocated to technical assets and IP, which we control through the company. The final tranche, 100 meters, is designated for legacy shareholders, which would include Alex's diluted stake. This way we get 150 meters each. The company gets 400 malers for operations and expansion, and Alex gets maybe 10, 15 hours for his trouble. He can't complain about being cheated since he's technically getting paid for his shares. Thoughts? Sarah. Subject: distribution discussion. Marcus here. I like the alternative approach. It's cleaner legally and gives us plausible deniability if anyone asks questions. But I want to add one more element. Let's structure my compensation package so that I get retained as CEO of the combined entity for at least 5 years, with guaranteed annual compensation of $5 million plus equity participation. That puts me at $25 million over 5 years, plus whatever additional equity appreciation we see. Sarah, you should negotiate something similar as COO. We've earned it after putting up with Alex's arrogance for all these years. One more thing, let's make sure the purchase agreement includes a clause preventing Alex from competing with the combined entity for at least 10 years. I want him completely out of the industry. Marcus. I stared at the screen, reading Marcus's email over and over again. Alex's arrogance for all these years. This from someone I had considered my closest friend, someone whose wedding I had been in, someone I had trusted with my financial future and my professional reputation. But anger wasn't going to solve my problem. I needed to think strategically. I forwarded copies of all the incriminating emails to Margaret Chen, along with a detailed technical analysis of how the fake Jim Patterson identity had been created and managed. Then I began planning the next phase of my counterattack. If Marcus and Sarah wanted to play games with technical assets and IP, they were about to discover that I had retained certain advantages they weren't aware of. The software that powered Nexus Innovations wasn't just code. It was architecture that I had designed with specific dependencies and fail-safes built in. While other programmers could modify or update the surface-level features, the core systems required deep knowledge that only I possessed. More importantly, I had built those systems with certain administrative controls that were hidden from the standard documentation. Not backdoors exactly, but diagnostic and maintenance tools that allowed me to monitor system performance, audit security protocols, and ensure data integrity across the entire platform. Over the weekend, I began implementing what I privately called the passive-aggressive protocol. I didn't sabotage anything. That would have been illegal and would have given them justification for their claims about my behavior. Instead, I made subtle modifications to non-critical systems that would create minor but persistent annoyances for anyone trying to manage the technical infrastructure without my involvement. Database optimization routines that would gradually slow down unless run with specific parameters that only I knew. Security protocols that would generate false positive alerts every few hours. Backup systems that would mysteriously require manual intervention to complete successfully. Nothing that would harm the business or affect client services. Nothing that would constitute sabotage or destruction of property. Just death by 1,000 tiny cuts that would make their lives miserable and demonstrate that running a technology company without its chief technology officer was more complicated than they had assumed. But my real masterstroke was more subtle. I had discovered that TechFlow's due diligence team was scheduled to begin their technical audit the following Monday. They would be examining our code base, infrastructure documentation, and development processes to verify that the intellectual property they were purchasing was as valuable as they believed. The problem for Marcus and Sarah was that much of that documentation existed only in my head or in personal notes that I had never committed to the official company repositories. While the code itself was functional, understanding how to maintain it, modify it, or integrate it with other systems required knowledge that they simply didn't possess. More importantly, there were several key components of our platform that relied on third-party services and APIs that I had set up through personal relationships with other companies. The technical contracts and access credentials were documented, but the informal relationships and support channels that kept everything running smoothly were tied directly to me. If TechFlow's technical team tried to verify the stability and maintainability of our platform without my cooperation, they were going to discover some very uncomfortable gaps in the documentation. On Sunday night, I received a panicked email from Marcus. Subject: Urgent, technical documentation. Alex, I know things ended badly between us, but we need your help with something time-sensitive. The TechFlow team is beginning their technical audit tomorrow, and they're asking for detailed documentation of several system components that seem to be missing from our repositories. Specifically, they want to understand the architecture of the client data synchronization system, the real-time analytics pipeline, and the third-party integration framework. I can't find comprehensive documentation for any of these. Can we put aside our personal issues long enough for you to help us get through this audit? I'm not asking you to come back to the company, but we need to make sure the sale goes through smoothly. The faster we can close this deal, the faster we can all move on with our lives. Marcus, I smiled as I read his email. The desperation was beginning to show. I crafted my response carefully. Subject: urgent, technical documentation. Marcus, I'm surprised you're having trouble with the documentation, since your decision to remove me from the company was based on concerns about my competence and judgment. Surely someone as capable as you wouldn't need help from someone you considered to be a liability. However, since you asked nicely, I'm willing to provide consulting services to help with your technical audit. My standard rate for emergency consulting is $500 per hour, with a minimum 40-hour engagement fee paid in advance. Given the urgency you've expressed, I assume you'll want to move quickly on this. Please have your legal team send over a consulting agreement, and I'll make myself available as soon as the initial payment clears. Best of luck with your audit. Alex, I didn't expect him to accept my consulting offer. The point was to demonstrate that I held cards they hadn't realized I was still holding. Every hour they delayed the audit would cost them negotiating power with TechFlow, and every problem the audit uncovered would reduce the sale price, or potentially kill the deal entirely. But Marcus surprised me. Within 2 hours, I received a call from Jennifer Hayes, the external board member who had been present during my termination. Mr. Pierce, we've reviewed your consulting proposal, and we're prepared to move forward. However, we need to modify the terms slightly. I'm listening. We'll pay your hourly rate, but we want the work done on site so our technical team can observe and document everything you do. We also want you to sign an agreement stating that all work product belongs to the company and cannot be used in any legal proceedings against us. I almost laughed. They were so desperate to get through the audit that they were willing to let me back into the building, but they wanted to control every aspect of the engagement to minimize their risk. I counter-propose, I said. I'll do the work remotely, with screen sharing so your team can observe. All technical documentation I produce will belong to the company, but I retain the right to keep copies of my own work for my professional portfolio. And the consulting agreement includes a clause stating that this engagement doesn't constitute an admission of wrongdoing by either party. There was a long pause. We'll need to discuss this with our legal team. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. After that, my rate doubles due to the extreme time pressure you've created. That evening, Emily and I celebrated our small victory with takeout Thai food and a bottle of wine we had been saving for a special occasion. They're rattled, Emily observed as we reviewed the day's communications. A month ago, they thought they could push you out quietly and divide up the spoils. Now they're paying you $500 an hour to fix problems they created by removing you in the first place. It's not about the money, I said. It's about positioning. Every interaction we have now establishes that I'm not the weak, defeated victim they expected me to be. I'm a professional who has something they need, and I'm going to make them pay market rates to get it. The next morning I logged into the screen sharing session with Marcus, Sarah, and 3 members of TechFlow's technical due diligence team. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now being paid to help facilitate the sale of my own company to people who had orchestrated my removal. But I had a plan. Good morning, everyone, I said as my screen came into view. I understand you're having some issues with the technical documentation for several core systems. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, TechFlow's lead technical architect, took charge of the meeting. She was clearly brilliant. Her questions were precise and demonstrated a deep understanding of distributed systems architecture. Under different circumstances, I would have enjoyed the technical discussion. Mr. Pierce, we've been reviewing your codebase for the past week, and we have concerns about the maintainability of several critical components. The client data synchronization system, in particular, seems to rely on undocumented dependencies and custom protocols. That's correct, I replied. The synchronization system was designed to handle the specific scalability challenges we encountered as the company grew. Off-the-shelf solutions couldn't handle our data volume and real-time requirements, so I developed a custom approach. Can you walk us through the architecture? For the next 3 hours, I provided a detailed technical explanation of the systems I had built, but I did so in a way that demonstrated exactly how complex and interdependent everything was. Every component I described revealed 2 more components that required specialized knowledge. Every protocol I documented referenced custom libraries and frameworks that existed nowhere else in the industry. By lunch break, it was clear that TechFlow's team was beginning to understand the scope of what they were trying to acquire. Mr. Pierce, Dr. Walsh said during a private side conversation, how long would it take to train a replacement technical team on these systems? That depends on the experience level of the team and how much you want to modify the existing architecture. For a team of senior engineers with distributed systems experience, probably 18 to 24 months to achieve full competency. And how long to completely re-architect everything using standard approaches? 3 to 4 years, assuming you're willing to accept some performance degradation and feature limitations during the transition. I could see her doing the math in her head. TechFlow was paying $800 million for a company whose technical assets would require years of additional investment to maintain or replace. The person who understood those assets best had just been fired and was now charging them $500 an hour to explain why their acquisition was more complicated than they had realized. After the technical session ended, I remained on the call while Marcus and Sarah discussed scheduling with TechFlow's team. I muted my microphone but left my speakers active, allowing me to listen to their conversation. "This is more complex than we anticipated," Dr. Walsh told Marcus. "Your technical infrastructure is highly sophisticated, but it's also highly specialized. We're going to need ongoing access to Mr. Pierce or someone with equivalent expertise to manage the integration process." "Alex isn't available for long-term consulting," Sarah replied quickly. "We had to terminate our relationship due to performance issues, but we can provide documentation and training for your team. The documentation we've seen so far is incomplete, and the systems are too complex for traditional training approaches to be effective. We may need to wreck